Oh, hello everybody, welcome to the AWS Michigan Meetup. Today we're going to have a talk presented by Lancelot Carlson, who I'm introducing here. He's going to talk about PCI Compliance on AWS. Members of the audience, we appreciate your questions and interaction. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll throw you the catch box and you just talk into it. It's soft, so it won't hurt your head or anything. And also, would love anyone listening in the audience or let your friends and family know about the Great Lakes Tech Leaders community. We're an online Discord community. You can sign up by going to gltl.rbn.ai, and we hope to see you there. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Lancelot Carlson.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for the opportunity. So I wanted to talk about HealPay's, specifically PCI Compliance Journey. This happened in 2018, so things maybe have changed since then, but probably not by much. So I think it's still relevant. Back then, I was a young co-founder, growing a company with a product that was gaining traction. We had a sponsoring bank that told us that we had to get PCI compliant. And it was scary. We've all seen this movie. What is it you do here? On-site audit, oh no. Yeah, it was a daunting task, especially because I had zero experience with audits. Literally, I'd been an entrepreneur since the beginning of my career, and I had never gotten an audit. I was a consultant before I started the payment processing company, and audits just wasn't a thing yet in my career. And so I was freaked out, but was willing to take the challenge. So why do we care about PCI compliance? I hate audits in general, especially then. I thought it was kind of stupid because, we all want our data, our money, our customers to be safe. And I was supposed to put this slide up for that. But hold on a second. I'm having some issues because I have to come back and forth, so bear with me. I didn't think that PCI audits necessarily achieved complete safety. I felt like it gave you a sense of false security. But when I went through the audit, I did learn some things at the very least, and I do think that they have a place. I do think that the PCI auditing process could be made better in general, but this is what we've got. Yes. So the sponsoring bank, because we were onboarding a very large church, like this is a mega church. I don't know if you can see how mega it is. It's got, multiple, it's like bigger than a school. The amount of payment processing volume that they were bringing in was massive. The bank was wanting us to now get PCI compliant because we were pushing over some transaction limits, which I'll talk about later, that required us to be in a different category for PCI compliance. We knew that on-site was not required, and we kept pushing the bank back on this requirement, but they wanted it. So, especially since we hadn't gotten any on-site audits prior, so they felt that at least one would help us get to the point that we needed to be for the future. So, our team had zero experience with compliance audits. We had 2 months of work to migrate off of EC2 and switch to a more compliant setup. We were still developing features for the church and all of our other merchants. So that was the pressure. And they wanted us to pick a vendor This is who we went with at the time. We were using them for PCI scanning, and we got a pretty good deal with them. I thought it was funny though. If you can read it, it's called Viking Cloud now. So I kind of chuckled and.
There you go.
Midjourney?
I drew this. No, yeah, Midjourney. And I couldn't decide which one I liked the best. So I had to show all of them. I'm part Swedish too, so Control scan was 30 grand, which that was a deal. And we got half of it paid by our sponsoring bank, so that was good, because they were the ones forcing it on us. And we had a 2-week notice before the on-site audit. So we were scrambling. They said that they would they gave us an agenda for what the on-site audit would cover, which was good, because they said that a control scan specifically said that the more that we can do up front before the audit, the better, which is kind of strange because it's like, okay, you're being audited, but I guess it makes sense. Like, do as much as you can prior to the audit so that when we get here and on-site, we'll do gap analysis, and then there'll be less to do after the fact that we have to verify. So, and I don't know, it's a little bit grainy, but this is a TPS report, and I picked the one with the fish on it. That's a fish.
More Midjourney?
Yeah, right. I wish. I don't know does Midjourney have humor? Yeah. Unintentional or intentional? It can't do words, exactly. As far as I've seen, but it can do 6 fingers.
Yes.
Yeah. So they mentioned this. They try to get more upfront so they can decrease the remediation time after gap analysis. So we were in the middle of migrating everything from ECS at the time from EC2 to ECS, because we actually were studying it and we're like, okay, ECS, especially in 2018, made the most sense to be PCI compliant without too much fuss. We were kind of obsessing over EKS at the time. It was fairly new, but it just wasn't viable. The biggest thing that we ran into, not the biggest thing, there's a plethora of things, but like when you use EKS, you were using a raw EC2 instance that you had to set up the AMI for, and the AMI that was given automatically by ECS, by Amazon, was already in scope for PCI compliance and had been vetted. So we would have to create our own AMI that was PCI compliant, and then the auditor would have to sit there and make sure that we had auto patching and all this other stuff. And so just was not a viable option. So the auditor came on site. He was very nice, polite, and dressed well. I was not. And we were hotboxed.
Light or dressed well.
Huh?
Light or dressed well.
Well, I think I was holding it cool. But we were hotboxed in our conference room with my CTO. We got some more Midjourney. Yeah. It's lava. That's right. This was better than the one that we had. So it was interesting because the auditors do this dance towing the line between giving you guidance and auditing when they're on site, because there's certain things that they're like, well, we're not supposed to tell you what to do, but.
Good inflection.
Right. But they do want you to succeed, which is funny because in an audit, typically you don't want to say anything, you just want to evaluate. But when you're paying your auditor, things are a little different. Which maybe it's actually a good way to go. I don't know. Went over our ECS setup and agreed that was the best setup. And then we based this off of the AWS services and scope, which I do have a link to this, and it's a long list of things, and maybe I'll show you guys after the presentation this list because it's super important. The list is important, but you also have to read the details. Because if you don't read the details, you'll just think that EKS is in scope and that you're fine. And you're. But it's not clear from the website that that's the case. Like, it just says these are the ones in scope, and that's it. And you really have to dig in and read the actual Amazon documentation on everything, because I mean, I didn't do it. My CTO did it, and she's super, super technical. And so, like, you do want to have some professionals like Right Brain get involved with that kind of stuff, or just use ECS. So it was a relatively painless process because of this. He was very impressed with our CTO, who was very well versed in security and researched self-attestation in her spare time. I forget what there is a term for the thing that you do to get, like if you want to become a auditor yourself, like she was researching that. So she was awesome. So in the second day, we started to dig into some of our gaps that he was finding, which was, he had some questions about the requirements 6, 11, and 12, which I'll get into in a second. And then he prepared a gap analysis. And then after that, so this was, I'll get into this later. Remediation. This is how I like to remediate things. This still took 2 months, but it felt relatively painless because of ECS, which I cannot recommend ECS enough if this is your requirement that you have to be PCI compliant. And I'll get into the levels of PCI compliance that matter. There are most merchants don't have to go this route if they can. It depends on what you're doing. Like, we're a payment vendor running a crap load of volume, a lot of volume. And, even if you're an e-commerce store doing a lot of volume, you might still not be under this umbrella depending on how you've integrated with your payment vendor. So requirement 6, was one of the things that we needed to remediate, which was to demonstrate PCI compliant application software development and maintenance practices, which consisted of the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. So it's not necessarily that we didn't abide by this, but they just wanted to make sure that we did, and so we had to come up. We didn't have documentation about the ways that we did comply with all this stuff. Requirement 6, if you're curious, talks about injection flaws, SQL injection, et cetera, all the injections, buffer overflows, insecure cryptographic storage, insecure communications, improper error handling, all high-risk vulnerabilities identified in this other requirement 6.1. I have to look that up. Cross-site scripting, improper access control, cross-site request forgery, broken authentication, and session management. Pretty standard web application security stuff. There. This is only one of the 12 requirements, but it's to give you an idea.
These were auditing requirements, or these were custom requirements?
No, this is PCI compliance.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's a big document. I'm not ready for that yet. Oh, maybe I am. So requirement 11 is AVS scanning and or ASV scanning and pen test scanning. I personally think scanning is, in general, a strange process, especially the scan that just hits, like, literally you give it your URL and then it port scans, and you're like, okay, I'm compliant. Like, all right, we did basic things to make sure that only, encrypted traffic is, yeah, anyway. Cumbersome it's a cumbersome process to do the pen test scanning. The ASB scanning is pretty easy, although the vendors are pretty bad for the most part. Their interfaces are terrible. And anyway, I think ASB scanning is a joke, but you got to do it. Requirement 12 is to implement risk assessment process and perform security awareness training. So this was actually really beneficial to our company. We had not documented our processes, and we were not necessarily doing regular security training, but we had formalized all of that. So we had formalized, we wrote the best documented processes for all of this, and it's really, I think it's better than, our docs were better than what, so again, the auditor was actually like, hey, we can actually give you our version of these processes if you want. But we decided to write ourselves, and it ended up being much better and entertaining. So, who would have thought? You can make compliance docs that are somewhat entertaining, but it keeps people engaged more. You end up maintaining it more if you do it yourself, I think. And then we picked a vendor called ECS for the security training, and they've been great. I actually do kind of enjoy doing them. I mean, it's just, they're so easy. I don't know if, huh?
The gamification.
Yes. Yes. And you're just trying to fish yourself. No, or fish, you're going through the fishing. Oh, that's another thing we actually did this year was my CTO and I had to discreetly turn on a phishing thing, which is kind of fun to see the Slack emails come in what is this? All right, you did good. You did good. Conclusion. This is the jump to conclusions, Matt. There's a theme here, I think. We received our ROC and AOC. And the AOC is your attestation of compliance. It's the thing that you need to get that when requested of you from specific vendors, they're like, hey, I need to see your AOC to make sure you're PCI compliant. That's the thing you give. Some people, like us personally, we require that we get an NDA because some of the stuff in there we don't want necessarily people seeing, but there are other people that are okay with just giving it out. But I probably would recommend, telling people hey, you need an NDA. Our CTO and I both got sick because the auditor was sick and we were hotboxed. So we've been doing self-attestation ever since. No more on-site audits. And I also recommend ECS for this kind of stuff. Did I have another slide? Yeah. So some other things I wanted to mention, sidebar things. So when it's a good idea on your payment forms to turn analytics off, because I have found that almost every analytics company, when I've asked them for their PCI compliance, which is hilarious because most of the customers that these analytics companies are serving are e-commerce.
But like you said, like you had mentioned, it's a lot of e-commerce doesn't do it themselves. They go straight to the payment warehouse or something like that, which is where that ends up mattering.
But yes, but there's still some scope involved in when they're on your website and they're filling in their credit card information. Just turn it off on that page.
Yeah. Instead of capturing keys or something like that. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hello, Lancelot. Question, you touched on it a little bit, ECS being PCI compliant, a lot of the heavy lifting out of the gate.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how AWS adapts to changes in PCI DSS standards and if there's a mechanism in place to keep customers in the loop? Do they say, hey, this change is coming, so saddle up?
It's a good question. From my experience, we haven't gotten many updates from AWS, but maybe you have. But the last update that we received that was of any relevance was when they upgraded the SSL. That was a huge deal. And we actually had to work closely with AWS on that because we're like, you're not going to make the deadline.
Yeah.
But it was like, okay, well, no one's going to make the deadline then, so okay. But other than that, they do a regular job at, that's kind of why we like ECS, is that they don't necessarily, it's a software as a service kind of thing. So their team is, because you've given all the infrastructure like stuff to them, they can control the software that's running on EC2, so they can have the antivirus that's proper and the auto patching and all the lockdown that they need to do on the AMI instance itself. So, there may be, I know they have some other like security things, services, and we do have some of them set up, but I don't actually interact with it that much. So I don't know if the notifications end up coming through that, but for the most part, it's just worked. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I had two questions.
Yeah.
Not that I'm doing PCI, but I had done it I was part of the team which did it for Borders
Okay.
Bookstore, and this was 2009. So that page which you showed, I remember going through all those and doing that.
So you're feeling the story.
So my two questions, since I've not done PCI since 2009,
Yeah.
I was just curious. I remember one thing they had told us, we were using IBM e-commerce platform, the credit card, how it had to be encrypted and all that kind of stuff. So what has changed now, like in AWS, how is that achieved?
Yeah.
That's number one. And number two is, you said this PCI audit was few years back, right?
Yes.
Have things changed now, like since there is a rapidly growing stuff? Like if somebody were to go PCI, I'm just curious, what would
Good
people
question.
use?
Well, so when I mentioned like in 2018 that I don't necessarily know if there are differences, I was specifically talking about EKS. So I know that ECS is still perfect for it. I don't know if EKS is a viable option now without more of your own customization and AMI stuff that's just a pain in the butt to do. I think that they have made strides to make it easier, and that the base AMI that you use isn't as bad as it was in 2018, but we haven't really had to do research on it. So, and maybe Right Brain knows, but and so for the encryption is a very good question. When it comes to credit card information or any private information in general, you want to play hot potato as much as possible. For a lot of reasons. A big reason is that if you do decide to host it, when you talk to your insurance carrier, your data cybersecurity insurance carrier, they're going to want to know all of the encrypted credit cards or encrypted anything that you're storing on your system and how you're doing it. And then they're going to charge you a lot of money for doing that. So your business model, if it is to store credit cards, better pay for and profit from storing credit cards. Otherwise, it's just not worth it. So we use payment gateways to store credit cards. We don't store credit cards. We hot potato everything as much as possible. There's encryption in transit and there's encryption at rest. And so like AWS has a lot of services that are one of them specifically that's interesting for doing credit card transfers at in transit is SQS. So we do use SQS heavily, and it is a great service for making sure your credit card isn't. You got to make sure your credit card's encrypted when you do it, but it's a good service to use. And a lot of payment transactions take more than a second or 2 seconds. Sometimes the gateways take a while to respond, so you do need something like an SQS to, you know, when the gateway takes 5 or 10 seconds, which it has done, you don't want it slowing down the rest of your application. Yeah.
I have a couple questions for you. One, do you know, are there professional consultancies that can do pen testing for you to make sure, like, you know, they could do like an adversarial thing, try and break into your network and make sure that, you know, you're pretty clean that way?
Yes. I don't know offhand what the names are now, but typically, especially if you're engaging with like a control scan, they will have a vendor for that if they don't have it in-house. So it's just a matter of like, hey, how much does this cost versus this? And
the second question was, when you're passing along the credit cards, do they care about like any caching you might do? Like, hey, you better make sure those caches are flushed, or is that like not a concern?
it is definitely a concern. So anytime any credit card is sitting for any amount of time, it shouldn't be. You need to hot potato as fast as possible. So yeah, caching credit cards would not be a good idea.
I mean, like you get it to your system, right?
Yeah.
And your system might do caching that you're not aware of.
Right.
And is that something that they audit for?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, anytime anything is cached or anything like that, it's not. Yeah,
Okay.
it's bad.
Gotcha.
And I mean, so that extends to caching and logs. Logs are bad. That's a real big no-no when you just, you know, your logs are just writing out the credit card in the log, and then it's just, yeah, and it's not even encrypted sometimes, you know.
Yeah,
So
I've been seeing a lot about that, about not passing
Yeah.
via the get, the get rest method, because it puts things in the parameters and in the URL, and that URL gets logged. Yeah.
oh god, a query string,
Yikes.
not good.
You had mentioned Viking Cloud. Was it called Cloud Scan now, or is it now
So it's Viking Cloud. It was Control Scan.
Control Scan? Okay.
Yeah.
So that, from what you've described, helped you prepare for the audit.
Yeah.
Is there like are you leveraging native AWS security tools to help with your PCI compliance? And are you using like a third party, like real-time threat detection, like I'm not sure of a tool off the top of my head, but just like something that's like constantly monitoring for threats in real time, or are you just using the AWS stuff?
We're just using the AWS stuff. Yeah.
And what are those services that you found the most beneficial?
We use, I don't know about beneficial, but we do use, I mean, because we haven't had too many issues with threats and whatnot, but they're there monitoring things. We have like CloudTail and I forget what the other services were called. But
There's Security Hub,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
AWS Inspector, Guard
Yeah.
Duty,
Yeah.
the WAF, and it's
There's
like
just-
all the
there's
things, right?
way too many of them,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
you didn't have a need, at least right now, for like a third-party tool that's doing like active threat detection.
It would be interesting to have, but, you know, prohibitively expensive probably.
Yeah.
You know, so we like the AWS core is okay, you know, as much as I don't like their console. it's okay.
So I was just curious about the ECS because when you are doing the payment system on ECS, these are containers. They will go away, and you needed to backtrack. Then somewhere you need. I mean, obviously the credit card you won't be writing in the logs, but rest of it is okay in the logs, like as a part of the PCI. Like the containers will disappear. You need to go back and check the logs. Like
Right.
what special protection did you have to do for the logs for PCI?
You do not want to write cards to your logs.
No,
But
obviously not the cards, but
if you're
anything
wondering
else.
how to get back, you're wondering how
Yeah,
to use
yeah,
your card again?
I don't think you must be caching the card or anything. The person has to give the card again if they have
No,
to.
you can do save payment methods, but
Okay.
you have, when you're hot potatoing,
Uh-huh.
you send the credit card to the gateway.
Uh-huh.
So that's something that we don't run, but third-party gateway will store the credit card, so then they do all the encryption at rest and whatnot. But it is in their business model to do so. So they figured out, they pay the insurance and all that stuff, and they make
Got
sure
it.
it's all compliant. And you get back a token.
Got it.
And the
Okay.
token is what you can say the second time they want to make a payment, because we do a lot of that. We do a lot of bill pay stuff. So we have just tokens on our side, and it's like, if you want to rerun a payment or run another payment or do a recurring payment, token, payment, send it. So then credit card's not even,
Do you have to encrypt that token?
no. Well, technically
I mean,
we
like salt it or something?
technically we do server side, encryption like at rest, but we don't do anything beyond that.
Okay, I was just curious.
I mean, yeah.
That's an interesting one. With the authentication, we do that, we get the token back, we store it, but then there's also authentication when you go to use that token. You can't
Right.
just willy-nilly use it, right? It's all linked.
Which is great because it's specific to the user, your application.
Very specific,
Right.
right? So one question that I had is, are there any concerns or tricks to help with DNS and load balancers and stuff where it's passing through a bunch of different things and possibly a bunch of different IPs?
There are. That's beyond the scope of what I had to do because I am not a networking person, but I know there was an elaborate plan that was hatched with my CTO, and yes. So you do need to get that right. Unfortunately, I don't have the the real details on that, but yes, that's to me was one of the more complicated things to work out. And you have like private and public, and essentially you're wanting to isolate anything, card that's going to touch cards away from everything else.
Thanks.
Yep. Oh, thank you.